In the last video, I analyzed 8,533 fights in order to determine which metrics actually predict winning fights in the UFC. So which metrics translate to winning fights? So after doing some descriptive analysis, looking at correlations, and doing some logistic regression, a really clear pattern shows up. So what is this pattern? This pattern is that winning fights is not about doing more things. It is about doing the right things. All right. Winning fights is about doing the right things, and it's about doing these things effectively. When every other metric is taken into account, the single strongest statistical signal for winning is knockdowns. So it is knockdowns that are king, right? Knockdowns are king. So what does this tell us? This tells us something very important, and it is that fight-changing moments rather more than raw activity. Significant strikes definitely do matter, but here is the key thing. Accuracy matters more than attempt, okay? Accuracy is more important than volume. So accuracy mogs volume. Throwing more strikes or shooting more takedowns doesn't meaningfully increase the chances of winning once effectiveness and efficiency are accounted for. In fact, high numbers of takedowns without success actually correlate to losing. Control time does have a positive effect, but it is secondary to the amount of damage that is caused. So damage is the main thing that judges in the UFC are scoring for. So the big takeaway from the analysis is this. UFC fights are won by causing damage, and they are won by efficiency. Elite MMA fights are won by impact and efficiency and not volume. The stats that best predict winning aren't the ones that measure how busy a fighter looks. They're the ones that capture damage effectiveness in fight-altering actions. Yeah. And this raises a more interesting question. If these are the stats that matter the most, then what are the skills that actually produce these metrics and these desired stats? In one of my previous videos, I introduced 9 different metrics, and these metrics are significant strikes landed, significant strikes attempted, significant strikes absorbed, takedowns landed, takedowns attempted, knockdowns, control times, significant strike accuracy, and takedown accuracy. However, the thing about these metrics is that they are just numbers. And what these numbers don't do is paint the full picture. They are simply measurements that act as proxies for skill. What all these numbers are is taking skill and then trying to boil it down into numbers to produce quantitative measurements that you can actually measure statistically. And today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving my best shot at translating these numbers into real skill, and then afterwards I will be ranking them on how likely they are to win fights. So if we go back to our logistic regression, the single strongest predictor of winning fights was knockdowns. Let's think, in order to achieve a knockdown, what skills are actually going to be required to produce this result? And if we're going to simplify this, knockdowns come as a function of shot selection. All right. So shot selection is choosing the right strike for the right opening against the opponent's position and guard. All right. And then we have timing. So this is identifying when the opponent is vulnerable and committing at that exact moment. And then afterwards, we have distance management. So staying at the optimal range and forcing your opponent to fight at your desired range. Afterwards, we have accuracy. So landing on high value targets. And this is the chin, especially because that is how you usually achieve a knockdown. Or maybe it could be the liver or body shots. The next thing that you have is power transfer mechanics. So this includes having the correct stance, posture, footwork, and striking form that allow force to travel efficiently through the body. And afterwards, you have physical attributes. So here, your genetics do matter, all right? Genetics do play a huge role in determining how powerful you are, but they only can express themselves fully when you have sound fundamentals. And the next thing you have as well are feints and deception, so creating openings and reactions that make it possible to land clean shots. After this, we have significant strikes landed. So how is it that a fighter can land more significant strikes consistently? A fighter who lands more significant strikes typically has high-level offensive decision making. So they attack with purpose and not randomly out of desperation. They also have reaction-based offense, so strikes are thrown in response to an opponent's reactions and not guesswork. You're actually looking at the opponent, all right, observing the reads that they're giving you, observing the looks that they're giving you, and then reacting based on those. After this, you have strong shot selection. So you can see that a lot of the attributes which contribute to knockdowns also contribute to landing significant strikes because they are very similar skills. All right. So with having strong shot selection, you are choosing the right strike for the opening position and situation. Next, you have targeting intelligence, which is similar to shot selection, but it's knowing where to strike for the maximum effect and scoring. Next, you have timing, which is attacking during moments of vulnerability rather than forcing exchanges. And you have risk management, so understanding when not to strike and how to avoid unnecessary danger. And afterwards, you have fight IQ. All right, now fight IQ is sort of thought of as this mystical concept, but in reality, it is just the ability to process the information in front of you, process your opponent's reads, process distance, and process what your opponent is giving to you, and then adapting in real time in order to make the correct decisions under pressure. So fighters who encompass all of these things, all right, so fighters who land a lot of significant strikes include Alexander Volkanovski. So he constantly feints. All right, if you watch his fights, he constantly feints to draw reactions and then attacks off of exits and wins exchanges without overcommitting. And the same thing applies to Israel Adesanya. He is also very feint heavy. And I think that this is just due to the fact that they train at the same gym. They have the same trainer. I think it's Eugene Behrman, who trains both of these guys. So that's why, and this guy is obsessed with feints. He's obsessed with setting things up, deception, all that, and he builds very, very intelligent fighters. So Adesanya is a very intelligent, feint-heavy, reaction-based fighter who can land clean shots while taking minimal damage. And then you have Max Holloway, who I'm pretty sure has the most significant strikes in UFC history. He blends volume with intelligence. All right, so he is a high volume, high pace pressure striker, but he breaks his opponents through reads and timing. And you have GSP, who, like all of these fighters that I'm listing here, are extremely intelligent. All right, so they all have high IQ. GSP is a textbook example of risk managed offense and decision making under pressure. Next, we have significant strikes attempted. So, significant strikes attempted is essentially just a proxy for your output and your cardio, but not your efficiency. So if you have a style like Max Holloway, which relies on high pressure, then it is essentially just output and cardio. To break it down, you have work rate. So how often a fighter is willing to throw. And then you have their cardiovascular conditioning. All right, so the ability to sustain high volume or high output over many, many rounds. And then you have pressure style, which forces exchanges and overwhelms opponents with activity. Afterwards, you have pace tolerance, which is comfort operating at high tempo, even when shots are not clean. So here is a very important distinction that we have to make. A high number of significant strike attempts is not the same as high levels of effectiveness. A fighter can attempt many significant strikes while missing often, being inefficient, and taking unnecessary damage. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind. After this, we have significant strikes absorbed. So significant strikes absorbed are negatively associated with winning fights. I mean, the entire purpose of a mixed martial arts is to hit and not get hit. So at its core, this statistic is a measurement of defensive failure. As I said previously, the objective of striking is simple: hit and not get hit. What you're looking for is to absorb fewer significant strikes. And this is as a result of having good head movement. So slipping, rolling, moving the head off the center line, distance management. So do keep in mind that a lot of the same skills do appear multiple times because a lot of these things are interconnected. You know, these skills are not in isolation. They are connected to other skills. Afterwards, you have guard discipline. So having your hand positioning in the correct place and defensive awareness. Then you have defensive reactions. And this is more of a timing thing. So timing blocks, parries, and checks effectively. And on top of that, you have footwork and angles. So repositioning to avoid being a stationary target. You have now we have takedowns landed. So takedowns are very important in MMA, and they don't just score points. They often lead directly to control time and positional dominance. Successfully landing takedowns requires wrestling entries, and this is creating a safe, efficient path to the legs or body, more specifically your opponent's hips, okay? When you are trying to enter on a takedown, you are trying to get to your opponent's hips and not just their legs. Afterwards, you also need well-timed level changes. So changing levels at the right moment to avoid strikes. Next, you have chain wrestling. So linking multiple attempts together when the first shot is defended. Because at higher levels, usually the first shot is not going to work. Even at lower levels, like the amateur circuit or the regional circuit, like people know how to defend takedowns. What you really need to know is how to chain those together. And after you have clinch control, so winning underhooks, head position, body locks, basically thwarting and disrupting your opponent in the clinch, you're never allowing them to have a comfortable position here. And the last thing is finishing mechanics. So proper angles, balance, and pressure to complete the takedown. All right. So here's a key insight. Elite takedown artists do not rely on a single shot. They go from entry to finish, or they flow from entry to finish. And this is usually through chained takedowns. Next, we have takedowns attempted. Takedowns attempted are primarily a measure of intent and aggression, similar to the significant strikes attempted uh, metric, similar to the significant strikes attempted metric. Here are some important points. This metric is oftentimes negative. This metric is oftentimes negatively associated with winning. Because think about this, if you've ever shot a takedown in sparring, that takes a lot out of you, more so than to defend it. So takedowns cost energy, and most takedown attempts do fail. And a failed shot can result in a loss in position and exposed strikes. So a lot of the time, if you fail a shot, you can end up in a front headlock or a lot of other disadvantageous positions. So shooting for takedowns is not something that you want to avoid. As a matter of fact, it is a good thing if you're doing it correctly. It's a strategic tool. So the key to takedowns is setting them up. That is the most important thing, and making sure that they have a high success rate. Successful takedowns maximize points, control, and damage while minimizing wasted energy. After this, we have control time. So what is it that control time is really measuring? It is measuring positional dominance once the fight hits the ground. All right. So this is top pressure, using your weight and position to limit your opponent's movement when you're on the top. So this is when you're in full mount or maybe half guard or side control. You also have to have good balance. So staying stable while maneuvering and resisting your opponent's reversals and their sweeps. All right. If you're on the bottom, your goal is to get up, all right, or reverse the position. Because if you're on the bottom in MMA, you're just going to get punched, essentially. Like, you never want to be in this position in an MMA fight. Next, you have submission threat awareness. So creating openings while avoiding counters. And then you have mat IQ, which is very similar to fight IQ, but it's, fighting on the ground. So you're knowing when to advance into a submission or something else, hold your opponent down, or reset based on your opponent's reactions. The control time is only possible after getting your opponent to the ground through a takedown. And it's not just about takedowns, it's knowing what to do when you're on the ground that counts. Every metric that we track, be it strikes landed, strikes absorbed, takedowns, and control time, as well as knockdowns, they are is just a proxy for underlying skills. Elite fighters are not better because they do more. They are better because they correct faster and they're able to express skills more efficiently. If you want to win more fights, you need to stop asking, how do I do more? And so you need to ask, which one of these skills are limiting me and how can I correct this? And that is how fights are really won. Thanks for watching.